Hello, it's been a while. Believe me, I know. I was gone for like 3 months and I want to talk about that a little bit, but if you don't care about that and you just want to be here for the 1899 discussion, then you can look in the description for the timestamps and skip right to where the discussion starts. So I haven't made a video for like over 3 months at this point, and that's not for lack of wanting. It was sort of the combination of things picking up in my classes. The second half of the semester is always like go, 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 along with the fact that I am working on like a number of different videos all at once. Some of them are larger projects that I'm needing to take a lot more time to get finished, and then there's other projects that I'm like not entirely sure how to approach. So yeah, it's been kind of a weird time with my video making, but I thought what better way to break this 3-month hiatus than to discuss probably my most anticipated television series of 2022, which is, I mean, you guessed it from the title of this video, 1899. So clearly you can already tell that this is going to be a slightly different video than the kinds of videos that I normally make. Number one, I'm on camera, and usually when I'm talking about movies and TV shows, I'm usually not on camera. But I thought I would do this video as a little bit more of an informal discussion rather than like a really structured video essay, for a couple reasons. Number one is that I am going on vacation soon for the holiday season, and I just did not think that I would have the time to script, record, edit, upload an entire like structured video essay, especially because I am trying to work on some other videos at the same time. I do not want to take another 3-month hiatus. I want to have some videos in the bank. And the second reason why we're doing this as an informal discussion is because I just don't think that I have enough concrete, coherent ideas about 1899 to put out like a structured, argumentative video essay about it. So that is why we are doing this video like this. This is going to be an informal discussion of the show. We're just here to have fun, talk about this show, which I had a lot of fun with. So let's get into the actual discussion of the show. This is your official spoiler warning because I will be going in depth into this show. So if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest that you do see it, because trust me, this is not one that you want to be spoiled for. Also, light spoilers for the show Dark. I won't get into anything specific, I just will touch on like its premise here and there. And if you don't know anything about Dark, count yourself lucky, go and watch it. 1899, it takes place in the year 1899, who would have thunk it, and it follows an immigrant ship that is traveling from London to New York. On this ship are a number of different passengers from across Europe and even Asia, and those passengers include Maura Franklin, an Englishwoman who is traveling alone, Ike Larson, who is the captain of the ship, Lucien and Clémence, a French newlywed couple that does not seem to be too happy in their situation, Angel and Ramiro, two Spanish brothers traveling together, Yingli and her mother Yukjae, who are Chinese passengers but who are posing as Japanese, Virginia Wilson, who is like an extremely wealthy English woman who has a connection to Lingyi and Yukjae. Also on the ship are Jerome, who is a stowaway, and Oleg, who is working in, I believe it's like the engine room. He's a little coal shoveler. You know, you get it. In the lower class, there are a number of passengers as well, but we follow one specific Danish family consisting of Ibn and Anker and their 3 children, Tove, Krester, and Ada. There's also a mysterious man named Daniel Solis and a really creepy child. So the show kicks off when the ship that they're on, called the Kerberos, receives a signal from the company's sister ship, the Prometheus, which went missing 4 months ago. And the captain has to decide what to do about this, whether to investigate or to continue on his way. So I was incredibly excited for this show because I had watched the showrunner's previous show, Dark, which is just like one of the best TV shows I think ever made. I watched it near the end of last year, so it's actually been basically a year since I've started watching this show, and then I rewatched it at the beginning of this year, and it's just incredible. I think Dark is one of these shows that are absolutely mind-bending, but that just keep getting better with rewatches. I will recommend this show to anyone and everyone. It is that good. So because I'd already seen Dark and loved it, I was really anticipating the release of 1899 because I have complete faith in the showrunners Baron Moadar and Jantje Friese. Like, if they could do Dark, then I would literally trust them to do anything. And I think that comparisons between 1899 and Dark were always going to be inevitable, because that's just what happens when you create like one of the best shows ever. And I have to say that I think I had a very similar experience watching the first season of 1899 as I did watching the first season of Dark. It's a lot of strange events, many of which go unexplained, which lead to immense confusion in the viewer, but also draws you in to the point where you're like, you can't stop watching. You need to know what's going on. I actually think that I was a little bit more confused watching 1899 than I was when I was watching Dark, mostly because when I first started watching Dark, the entire show had already come out, so I'd heard things here and there about it, and I already had a little bit of an inkling that the show had to do with time. So when strange events started happening in Dark, I was kind of like, oh, time travel, right? But with 1899, I genuinely knew nothing about it. Like, I did not know what to expect at all going into this show. I had no idea if it was going to be like time this similar way that Dark was, or if it was going to be something completely different. So I had a tougher time piecing things together, and my thoughts and predictions about the show couldn't help but be influenced by Dark, at least a little bit. An example of this occurred in the very first scene of 1899. The show's very first scene is of the main character Mora in a mental asylum, being kind of restrained and yelling at her father, saying that she knows what he did on the Prometheus before she wakes up on the Kerberos. And so, because I had seen Dark, I wasn't sure if this was a memory that happened to her in the past, or if this was something that would happen to her in the future. And this was made even more unclear by the marks that Mora had around her wrists, which were clearly from being restrained. So I was kind of in this area where I was like, I don't know if we're dealing with time or not. So I don't know if what we're seeing actually happened, or if it will happen. But she has marks around her wrists, so like, what is going on here? Another example of this was when Daniel and the boy interact for the first time. I don't exactly remember which episode it was in, but it was closer to the beginning of the show. And I kid you not, I paused on this scene for so long, just comparing the two actors' faces, because they look similar, at least to me. And if there was anything that I learned from Dark, it's that they do not skip out on the casting. Like, they can cast to a T. And so the fact that they looked similar to me, I was like, this cannot be a coincidence. I was just going back and forth between the two actors' faces, trying to find every little similarity and wondering, oh my goodness, are we going to be dealing with time again? Is this another scenario where these two actors are the same character just from different times? But at the same time, I was like, I don't know if Baron Bohadar and Yantje Frizo would do that again. Later on in the show, when they were interacting in Mora's memory, I was dissuaded from this train of thought just by looking at the way that Daniel was interacting with the boy. I started to think that maybe he seemed more like a son or a baby brother, and I was right about one of those things. So those are just a couple examples of how watching Dark influences your experience of watching 1899, or at least the way that it did for me. And I think that because my ideas from Dark were influencing my ideas on 1899, it actually led me away from what was actually going on in 1899, and it took me longer to figure out what the secrets were. So let's talk a little bit more about these characters, because just like Dark, I'm sorry, I keep making reference to Dark, but again, I feel like it's kind of inevitable. 1899 also has a very large cast of characters that are all very interesting in their own ways. So our main character is Mora Franklin. When she wakes up on the Kerberos, we learn that she doesn't really know who she is, or have any memory of her past, only that her brother went missing, and she thinks that he was a passenger on the Prometheus, the ship from the same company that she's on that also went missing 4 months ago. So that is part of the reason why she is on this ship, because she's sus. She's like, something is going on here and I need to figure out what. The Captain Ike Larson is kind of this rugged, weathered man. We learn that he lost his entire family to a unaliving and self-unaliving, which, I'm sorry, I'm using TikTok terms because I just don't want anything bad to happen to this video. So his wife essentially set their house on fire while their 3 daughters were still inside, and all of them died in the fire. So he is still experiencing a lot of grief from that, and he's turned to substance abuse, specifically alcohol. We learn that Lucien and Jérôme were fighting in the army together, and Lucien wants to desert, but Jérôme doesn't. So Lucien locks Jérôme up, he steals a lieutenant's uniform, and then eventually reports Jérôme as a deserter. I assume that this happened because Lucien has some sort of health condition that causes him to experience very bad seizures that he says will eventually kill him. And he's traveling to New York now for a potentially life-saving operation. Ling Yi and her mother are posing as very wealthy Japanese immigrants, but they're actually quite poor Chinese immigrants. And Ling Yi drugs the girl who was originally supposed to be on the Kerberos so that she could take her place, but she accidentally gives her too much and she dies from that. And Mrs. Wilson is running like a sex work operation for them. but I believe that it's Yukjae who's been sleeping with the clients rather than Ling Yi, which when Mrs. Wilson finds that out, obviously she's not very happy about that. I don't know that much about Mrs. Wilson. Like, I kind of wanted to know, like, how she got into this and why specifically she has Ling Yi and Yukjae as her clients, or not her clients, but her employees. We also learned that Angel and Ramiro are not brothers at all. They're actually lovers, and they're running because Ramiro killed someone for Angel. And the Danish family, damn, I think that out of everybody's backstories, the Danish family got the shortest end of the stick. Like, this is really dark. The Danish family are quite poor, and they worked for somebody who was wealthier. They got into an altercation with their employer after he discovered that his son and Crester had a relationship. He shoots Crester, but Tove knocks him off balance, so the shot actually rips open Crester's eye instead of killing him, and that's actually how Crester gets his scar. And then their employer essayed Tove in like a sick form of what he thinks is justice, since Crester quote-unquote took something from his son, so he takes something from their daughter, which is super just messed up and really, really dark, and that's actually why Tove is pregnant. Their mother even has coped with this by turning to religion and saying that this is God's baby, when everyone around them knows, like, no, it's absolutely not. Part of Tove, Crester, and Ada's goal is that after they get to America, they're going to separate from their parents because this whole, like, religious fanaticism has taken over their mother, and they know that this is not healthy and they cannot continue living like this. I think the people that we know the least about are Clemence and Oleg. But it's alluded that Clemence has something up her sleeve, since Lucien does say that she can drop the act of liking him now, since they're no longer in front of her parents. Like, she already got what she wanted. So my idea is that maybe she used this marriage as a way to leave her family. We know that she's a very wealthy person, and that Lucien is actually not wealthy at all. So I'm assuming that her marriage to Lucien was kind of a way for her to leave her parents, who were maybe restrictive or controlling her life, and she saw Lucien as her, like, get out of jail free card. But she never actually loved him in the way that Lucien alludes that he loved Clemence. And now that I'm thinking about it, we actually don't know too much about Jérôme either. Like, I know we know his backstory and his relationship with Lucien, but we actually don't really know why he was on the Kerberos in the first place, like, as a stowaway. And I realize that as I'm saying this, my points and ideas are kind of getting muddled because of the twist. I mean, I'll just say it, it's a simulation. I was just wondering, like, why in the simulation would he be a stowaway? Why is he trying to find Lucien? Like, is it to get revenge? Because he does at one point have a piece of paper with Lucien's name and room number on it, and he breaks into their room, and it looks like he's looking for something, but I don't exactly know what that would be. But I think that the character I am most interested in at this point in time is Oleg, because we don't really know anything at all about Oleg. Other than that, he carries around this picture of the Statue of Liberty, and I think he says that he has a brother in America. But we don't know his backstories. We don't get his memories, other than a glimpse of the environment that his memory takes place when Yingli stumbles into it on accident near the end of the show, because as Daniel is messing with the simulation, all of these characters' memories start sort of fuzzing in and out together, and the different characters get to traverse through the environments of other characters' memories. This memory is so weird, and I don't really know what to make of it. His memory takes place in some sort of snowy landscape. It looks like perhaps a work site, and Oleg climbs out of this, like, I don't even know what it is, but he's covered in this black tar-like substance. And I genuinely don't know what this is about. Like, there are zero predictions in my brain about Oleg. The only thing that I can guess is that maybe he killed someone in the tar, because, I mean, that stuff is thick. It's definitely enough to suffocate someone, but I'm not confident enough in that to put it down as a concrete prediction. Overall, I know nothing about Oleg, and I want to learn about him. Because here's the thing, I like Oleg. I really like Oleg. He is probably one of my favorite characters despite not really knowing too much about him. And that is purely because of just the way he presents himself. Like, he seems very genuine and very sweet. He seems like a really kind soul, and I like his relationship with Yingli, although it does maybe feel a little bit fast. But I also have an idea about that. Because of the way that Oleg and Yingli get together, I'm wondering if they had some sort of previous relationship before being put into the simulation. When they meet on the ship, there's like this immediate sense of understanding between them, and I'm wondering if that maybe points to them having some sort of relationship outside of the simulation. And now that I'm saying that, I'm thinking back to Mora and Ike, and when Mora and Ike first meet, there is also a sense of understanding there right from the get-go. When you're watching it the first time, you kind of think, oh, like, they have gone through some similar things. She's lost a child and now thinks that she can't have any more kids. He's lost his entire family, so there is a level of understanding on that. But now that I'm theorizing about Oleg and Ying Li, I'm wondering, did Mora and Ike kind of know each other or have some sort of relationship beforehand, before the simulation? I'm not saying it was a romantic relationship beforehand, because the show was kind of clearly pointing towards a romantic relationship forming between Mora and Ike, but I'm wondering if they did have some sort of relationship outside of the simulation before being put inside it. Going back to Clémence and Jérôme and Oleg, I bring up the fact that we don't know much about these three characters, not necessarily as a critique on the show, but more as anticipation. Because, again, if I've learned anything from Dark, it's that the most seemingly inconspicuous, inconsequential character can, in the end, turn out to have a huge role in the show that you never see coming. And I am manifesting that, specifically for Oleg, because I really like this man, and I want to see more from him. This is an Oleg fan page, okay? I'm an Oleg stan. I also want to say that I love the way that 1899 is structured and paced. This is a slow show, as was Dark, and I love a good slow burn mystery, and boy do they know how to write a mystery. As you watch this show, I kept having that thought, like, damn, they really know how to make a mystery, because every time I finished an episode, all I wanted to do was go on to the next one. I just wanted to know what was going on. And I love the way that the intrigue was created, because the first 4 episodes of 1899 is entirely build-up. Like, it is pure build-up. We are introduced to all of this weird stuff happening. We dive into the characters' backstories and plot lines and their memories that they are reliving, and we're building these intrigue with all of these strange occurrences on the ship, and with the human-to-human character conflicts that are then reactions to the happenings on the ship. I think one of my favorite parts of the first half of the show, aside from like all just the weird stuff happening, is the buildup of the mutiny, because it just makes so much sense. After the captain receives the signal from the Prometheus, they investigate and they find this creepy ass boy. They bring the boy back on board and then weird shit starts to happen. They also receive a message from the ship's company telling them to sink the ship being the Prometheus. But because he's been experiencing weird hallucinations from his past, and just due to the strange nature in which the Prometheus was found, he decides that instead of sinking it, they're going to tow it back to Europe, essentially bailing on the trip to New York. And this pisses everyone off, especially since all of the passengers we've been introduced to are running from something or another. Like, they cannot return to Europe. So we're seeing the captain's side of things, where all of this weird stuff is happening to him. He's reliving the most painful, traumatic memories of his past, and he just needs to figure out what is going on with the Prometheus. But then we have the crew's side of things, and the lower class passengers' side of things. Crew clearly thinks the captain is a drunk. They think that grief has finally addled his mind and that he's gone crazy. And for the lower class passengers especially, they scraped together the money for this trip, and they probably can't afford another one. And then if you add on top of that Ada died under mysterious circumstances, and the captain decided against telling the family until they figured out what was going on. And I was like, oh my god, we are barreling towards a mutiny, and I was so excited. I would say that episode 5 acts as the midpoint of the show, and from there it's just balls to the wall. I think episode 5 is my favorite of the show, because there was a good mixture of questions and answers offered in that one, not to mention that it has one of the most horrifying events of the show, which is, I guess we're gonna call it the calling, in which every single person on the ship, with the exception of our main characters, is placed under some sort of spell due to a siren that leads them to jump overboard. And it's terrifying. Like, it's actually terrifying. Oh, sirens! Bro, I just put that together. So the show is clearly basing some stuff on Greek mythology. Like, the current ship that they're on is called the Kerberos, which is also Cerberus, which is Hades' three-headed dog. The other ship that went missing was the Prometheus, Forethought. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to the humans. Sirens are creatures of the sea that essentially call out to sailors and lead them to their deaths. Bro, why did I not make that connection earlier? In this case, it was like a literal siren. I mentioned before that all of our main characters survive, but I need to point out that Yukje and Crester don't. They are affected by the siren, and they end up jumping overboard. And I will have more things to say about that, but I just wanted to put that out there now. This is the event that essentially brings the two sides of the mutiny together, because, like, you know, everyone's dying. And they now have to figure out what's going on and how to stop these people from unaliving themselves. By the end of it, the main characters are the only people left, and they receive a message from the company to sink the ship. Their ship this time, the Kerberos. And so this event is basically what pushes them into the rest of this show. I just love the way that it was structured, like giving us 4 episodes of like solid build-up, solid intrigue, and then just balls to the wall from the rest of the time. I also want to bring up some of the folk songs that were used in the show, and I have no clue if this is actually something that's important or not, but I try to pay attention to as much of this stuff as I can because you never know what's going to be important. So I think we hear 2 folk songs used during the show. The first is a German folk song that is sung by Nina, Ike's oldest daughter, and the second is a Spanish folk song that was sung by Angel. During the calling, he kind of like shuts down and loses it a little. He barricades himself in the room, and when Ramiro finds him, he's like sitting in the corner just like singing to himself, trying to comfort himself. So I don't know if these folk songs have anything important to do with the actual lore of the show. I just thought I would put it out there because I thought it was interesting that we got 2 songs from 2 different cultures. I have to say that when I first saw Angel's reaction to this entire thing, I just straight up said, yeah, me as well. Because I think, like, if this was happening to me, if I was on a ship where everybody was jumping off, I think I would also be barricading myself in my room and just kind of rocking in a corner. That is something I will say about 1899, is that every character has very appropriate reactions to the things that are happening. And I think that the character that epitomizes this is Ike. This man is just losing his absolute shit the entire time. And you can't even blame him because, yeah, if half of the stuff that he was experiencing was happening to me, I think I would lose my mind too. First, he receives a message from a ship that has supposedly gone missing. Then they find a weird-ass boy on that ship with a weird pyramid triangle thing. Then he starts reliving the worst memories of his life, things that he's already lived but it feels real. Then he figures out that the one person on the ship, this woman that he's getting closer to and actually trusting, might not be that trustworthy because her name is on the passenger list of the Prometheus, and he also finds his own name as a captain on the Prometheus. Then he gets locked up due to the mutiny. Then the passengers throw this creepy ass child overboard, and literally 2 minutes later he reappears in a cabinet. Then the one woman you trust disappears in front of your very eyes with this demon child. Then you discover that there are literal whole worlds that mimic the memories of the people on the ship that you can get to through shafts in the floors of your cabin. Then this weird-ass man that you've never seen before drop kicks you onto the Kerberos somehow, where there are also dozens and dozens of identical ships just lined up. Then you watch the Kerberos appear through a whirlpool. Then you find out that the woman that you were kind of growing affection towards has a husband, and then you get killed. So honestly, yeah, he reacts in the exact appropriate ways. He is losing his mind the entire time, and I am totally on board with that because how else would you react? Once we get to, I believe it's either episode 6 or 7 of the show, we get the first big reveal of what is going on, and that is that this entire thing is a simulation. And I didn't know exactly how to feel about this at first. Mostly just because in general, simulation stories are not my favorite kinds of stories to explore. I am totally on board for a good simulation story, but they're not like the first thing that I would want to sit down and watch. Part of that could be because I recently watched another movie that came out this year that had to do with simulations, and it wasn't that great. I won't say what the movie's name is just in case, because I don't want to like offer spoilers, but it's a movie that came out this year and a lot of people were talking about it. However, even though simulation stories are not my favorite stories in general, I am still on board with this overall because once again, I trust Jantje Friese and Barenboe Adar with my life. I have the feeling that this is going to be a much larger story than we can even fathom at this point, in the same way that Dark was about time travel, which is a trope that has been done before, it's been done countless times, and yet Jantje Friese and Barenboe Adar were able to take that and make something so much bigger, so much crazier, that delved into much deeper, darker, much more interesting trains of thought and philosophies. And I really think that they are going to be doing something similar with 1899. I don't necessarily think that this show is just going to be about a simulation and that's it. I think that this show is going to delve into some interesting conversations about what reality even is. I mean, it already started to do that with the idea of Plato's cave. So if you don't know, here's a very brief and simple explanation of Plato's cave. cave. Plato's cave was a theory put forth by Plato, in which he posited that if there were a group of people chained to the wall of this cave and all they could see were shadows dancing across this wall, then they would think that these shadows were their entire reality. They would have no idea that there was a light source behind them and that there were other things moving in front of that light to create those shadows. They would consider the cave and the shadows to be their entire reality, even though we know that that's not true. There's an entire world out there. But they don't know that. Plato's cave, from my understanding of it, calls into question what reality even is and how we're supposed to interpret reality. There's also a conversation in the show, I believe in the last episode, where Henry Singleton, Moira's father, talks about how Moira was considering this when she was younger, and she was thinking about how if we're just in some reality that has been constructed by God, for example, then who constructed God? And what reality is God living in? And then who constructed the whatever constructed God? And then who constructed them? It just goes on and on and on forever. So I think that the show is going to delve into this even further. Specifically, when we got the final twist, which I will just say right now, they're in space. It's 2099 and they're in space. I was thinking that what if this space reality is not even reality itself? What if there is an even bigger reality behind this? And when we get to that reality, what if it's an even bigger one behind that? So the question essentially is how do we even know if we are living in what is objective reality? Is there even such a thing as objective reality? Even if we've escaped one simulation and ended up in what we think is reality, how do we know that that reality is not also a simulation? I'm excited in that aspect to explore those ideas because I have the feeling that we're not ending here, that we have not seen the end of this. When we finally got the reveal that it was a simulation, I had to pause for a second and really think and try to figure out how the simulation works. And I have a couple ideas on how it might actually work that I wanted to share with you right now. And again, I have no idea if either of these are even right. My first interpretation of how the simulation might work in the show. The passengers are on a ship traveling from London to New York, and they're all conscious of the fact that 4 months ago, a sister ship from the same company went missing. The captain, Ike, receives a message from that missing ship, at which point he has to decide whether or not to change their current ship's course to investigate the signal. That kicks off the characters' different points of conflicts and decision-making. As the simulation continues, certain events are programmed to happen on certain days, such as more and more passengers turning up dead, and the siren that leads to everyone jumping overboard. It's through these different events set up by the simulation that drive the main characters' decisions, and whoever is monitoring them is waiting for a perfect run of the simulation, which would be the ship successfully getting to its destination of New York at the end of the 8 days. Thus far, such a perfect run has not happened, since the characters keep making the same wrong decisions every single time, leading to a shutdown of the current simulation, which quote-unquote kills everyone, and reprograms them into the next run of the simulation, while placing the previous simulation in an archive. Did that make sense? Basically, had Daniel not messed with the simulation and had it shut down properly and restarted the simulation, the characters would all find themselves on another ship. Let's call it the Omega. Because why not? They would all be on the Omega, and they would all be aware of the fact that a sister ship from the same company called the Kerberos had gone missing 4 months ago. Ike would receive a signal from the Kerberos and have to decide what to do about it. Things would presumably happen in a similar fashion from there if we believe that Henry was right about them always making these same decisions every time. So that's option 1 of what the simulation is and how it works. Here is the second option. The missing ship, like the Prometheus, was never supposed to be part of this simulation. This could be supported by something that Henry says. He says something to Daniel like it was smart to regain access through the Prometheus. There's also 2 ideas coming from this idea that the missing ship was never supposed to be part of the simulation. So the first idea is that Daniel could have potentially messed with the simulation in a way that would allow the Prometheus to be a part of the current Kerberos simulation as a manner to get himself into that simulation and onto the Kerberos with Moira. However, if this was the case, then I don't see how the rest of the simulation would work, since I don't see what the quote-unquote inciting incident of that simulation would be, the thing that kicks everything into action. With the way that the show is now, it's very clear that the inciting incident of the simulation, the thing that kicks everything into action, is the Kerberos receiving a signal from the Prometheus. So if the simulation is not supposed to involve a ship that previously went missing at all, then I don't really know what the simulation was supposed to be. Was it supposed supposed to be that something else would eventually lead these characters to discovering their little memory scapes within the ship, and the simulation was sort of supposed to just be a psychological experiment, and they would get there in a different way. This doubly confuses me because if Daniel did mess with the simulation to place the Prometheus inside it, then why would the overlords not just pull the plug? Like, specifically, why wouldn't Henry send the ship's first mate to induce a shutdown and restart a run of the simulation where Daniel didn't mess with it? Can they induce a shutdown beforehand, or are they forced to live out the simulation until the characters' decisions make things go terribly wrong, and then the shutdown happens? I don't know. Just putting out questions. The second idea is that the simulation does work the way I explained earlier, where there is always a ship that previously went missing, and this was just the first run that Daniel used that missing ship to get onto the current ship. But there are also questions surrounding that. If this was the case, why would Daniel not have tried this earlier? And how was he getting both himself and Elliot onto the Kerberos before he used the Prometheus? Elliot being the boy who is Daniel and Moira's son. I'm not really sure. Those are just the questions I had about the simulation. It is really interesting to think about because, like, the more you think about it, the more options that there could be. And again, I don't know if this is just because, like, I'm interpreting something wrong, if it actually is quite clear to everyone else. Let me know if I'm just dumb. Another thing about the simulation I want to talk about is the implication of character memories and character deaths. The memories that we are shown in all of the memory landscapes that are housed in the simulation are, like, taking place in the year 1899. So I'm assuming that these memories did actually happen to these characters, but that the simulation has tailored them to place them in an 1899 setting. So I'm interested to know how those memories would then translate to the present day of 2099. Lucien and Jérôme's memory, in 1899 they were clearly part of some sort of army and some sort of battle. So I'm wondering, in the real world, in 2099, were they also part of the military, but it's just like a modern military, and Lucien still deserted and reported Jérôme as a deserter? I think most of the characters' memories could easily be translated into a 2099 setting. Ike's family all died, that can easily happen in 2099. Moira has trauma surrounding this mental institute, of course that can also happen in 2099. Lingyi could have killed her friend at any time period. Angel and Ramiro could have also killed someone in any time period. In the simulation, I believe that Angel and Ramiro's memory is the one with the well. I think that maybe whoever they killed was shoved down that well, but in the real world in 2099 they might have been pushed off of, like, somewhere very high and then fallen to their deaths. That's how I am imagining that memory is translated. One that I have the most questions about is Tove, Crester, Ibn and Ankur, because that one felt much more period specific to me. When you're in 1899, as messed up as it is, you can't imagine that someone would want to kill a young man for having a gay relationship with his son, and then would also take his revenge by essaying the daughter. In 1899, again, as messed up as that is, it's believable. I'm not saying it's unbelievable in 2099, but I'm just saying that I think it would have to be adjusted, especially if the world in the show has followed, like, the ebbs and flows of social justice that our world has. Then, like, obviously there are more gay rights, there are more women's rights. So is it just this specific employer that was extremely homophobic and misogynistic that ended up performing these acts? I'd also like to see more about character deaths, because multiple characters do die in the simulation, but I'm assuming that they don't die in real life. So I think when you have deaths in a simulation, you run the risk of there not being enough empathy there, because, like, if you see a character die in a simulation, then you can just assume that they're going to be okay in real life, since the simulation's not real. So I want to see how they're going to skirt around that, because when Oleg died, I was sad, but I also knew that he probably wasn't actually dead because it's a simulation. Same with Ibn and Ankur and Franz, who all drowned, which was terrifying to watch. I just think drowning is one of my fears. And also Angel, who died from something falling on him. Yeah, I think that when you have a simulation and then you have deaths, you have to walk a very fine line, because you're gonna lose a lot of sympathy from the viewer if they know that they're not actually dead. Let's talk about the creator twist. I like Moira being the creator, since there are other things that are sprinkled throughout the show that actually, like, falls into place when you know that Moira is the creator. For example, each episode starts with a character reliving their memories, and then we kind of zoom in through their eye, and there is a voice telling them to wake up before they, like, wake up fully. And I think that this is Mora's voice. When you listen to it again, it really does sound like her, which would make sense if she was the original creator of the simulation. Speaking of the whole waking up thing, I was always kind of confused as to why the characters already had their eyes open before they woke up, and I think it links to how they die, because specifically when we see the first mate kill Ike, he kind of just like drops to the ground, and I think his eyes are still open. So in my head, it's kind of like a deactivation. So when they wake up in the simulation, they already have their eyes open because they're there, just waking up is activating the person essentially. Here is my interpretation on the actual like creator situation and how the simulation came to be in the first place. Mora and Daniel created their first simple simulation, which was their son Elliot's bedroom, then put themselves into the simulation and made themselves forget he was actually dead. During their time there, Mora's brother Kieran used the opportunity to hijack the simulation and turn it into a huge psychological experiment, trapping both Mora and her father aside, and all of these other passengers. And this potentially links to how Kieran always resented that Mora was closer to their father than that he was, and that she was turning out to be exactly like him, hence addressing the letter to Henry, which was short for Henriette, Mora's middle name. I think at some point Daniel figured out what was going on, and he was able to break out of the simulation with Elliot, but Mora was still stuck inside, seeing as she had made it a point to forget. Daniel lives this simulation over and over and over again, in the hopes that one day he would be able to make Mora remember, find the exit code, and wake her up for good. Henry has also become conscious of the fact that he is in a simulation, and he is also trying to do the same thing, but unlike Daniel, he's not trying to wake Mora up, he's trying to get himself out and keep Mora inside. And I think that this might be because of his resentment for his children. Mora does say that her mother started to lose herself after she had children, and that her father kind of never got over it. He kind of always blamed the kids. So even though Mora was closer to her father and more similar to Henry, he still held that level of resentment towards them. I'm assuming he holds resentment towards Mora for creating the simulation in the first place, which then allowed Kieran to take it over. But I have questions. So if Mora created the simulation as a way to keep her son Elliot alive, who I'm assuming has had some sort of terminal illness at some point, if she created the simulation to keep a version of her son alive, and then she put herself in that simulation but made herself forget that she had a son, I don't understand why she did that. Like, I don't understand that. If the whole point is to preserve your son and live in a world where your son doesn't die, then why make yourself forget that you have a son and a husband? The math is not mathing there for me, and again, I don't know if this is just because I missed something or I'm interpreting something wrong, or if there is more to the story than what we're being told. I guess now is a good enough time to talk about the letters. We learn that everyone on the ship, at least the main characters, have received a letter that I'm assuming came from Kieran, seeing as he is like the overlord of this entire thing. My first thought was that they were the only real people in the simulation, and that all of the other passengers on the ship were sort of like NPCs, and so that's why the siren affects them and they all jump overboard. But again, we have to remember that Yukjay and Crester also jumped overboard. And did the people who died beforehand also receive letters? I'm inclined to say yes, since we were shown that Lucien received a letter and he died as a part of the shutdown after he had a really bad seizure. So I'm assuming that Angel, Franz, and potentially even an Anker also received letters. They just died as a part of the shutdown before Daniel could mess with the simulation to bring them all into the archive. Going back to Yukjay and Crester, my question is, did Yukjay and Crester also receive letters? Since they died as a part of the calling along with everyone else on the ship, and the only characters who were unaffected were those we were shown in episode 8 to have received letters, or people who we can infer received letters. I just don't know what to think about the deaths of Yukjay and Crester. And also, I'm assuming that they're not actually dead. We do see them along with the other passengers, so like, why did they die in the simulation? Okay, let's talk about the space twist. I kid you not, the very first thing I have in my notes is, okay, I don't know. I wasn't entirely sure how to feel about this, seeing as it is such a huge departure from the idea with which I entered the show, but I think the more time and space that I get from it, the more accepting I am of it. The channel The Thrifty Typewriter talked about mystery box shows and how their strengths are often also their weaknesses, since you don't end the show on the same plane that you began it. They go in completely different directions that you wouldn't have been able to see coming, and that you wouldn't have been privy to from just the premise of the show alone. And you can really see that with 1899. I mean, you start the show in the year 1899 on a passenger ship, and you ended in the year 2099 on a spaceship in space. And I can't fault people for being upset about that. There will be people who don't like this ending at all, just because of how big of a departure it is from what we were told the concept of the show was. But I think that's just the risk you run with a mystery box show. In the end, I personally am on board with this because I get the feeling that this season was just dipping our toes into this world, in the same way that the first season of Dark was just dipping our toes into that world. Dark gets bigger and crazier with each season, and I feel like with 1899 we are being led into something much bigger, crazier, and more complex of a story than we had ever anticipated, and I really do want to explore it. Let's end off with just some miscellaneous theories about the show. Number 1, is Daniel dead? And is Elliot dead? Because when Mora wakes up on the ship in presumably reality, the other passengers that we saw on the ship, on the Kerberos, are still there with her. They're in the same, room. But Daniel isn't. There is a chance that he could be somewhere else on the ship, and I think that if he was dead, it might put more significance into the line that he says to Mora, which is, "I love you, never forget." Because if he was also gone, then it would be really tragic for Mora to wake up to a world in which both her son and her husband are dead. But if he was dead, then that begs the question as to how he was even able to be in the simulation in the first place. Perhaps he could be some sort of computer program, but I don't know how much I believe that. Number 2, the spaceship itself. We see that there are multiple little sections of the spaceship, so my first thought was that maybe each little section of the spaceship is running its own simulation. So are there hundreds and hundreds of simulations taking place on the ship at the same time, and this is just the one that we were shown? Is Kieran potentially running hundreds of psychological experiments on all of these passengers at the same time? That's question number 3. Where are they going? And why are these specific people on the ship? Did they volunteer to be on the ship? Are they passengers or are they crew? Assuming that all of their memories are real, then maybe part of the reason that they're on their ship is that they are actually still running from their pasts. Also, the ship, the Kerberos, is an immigrant ship going from one land to another, so I was wondering, is the space shuttle also a sort of immigrant ship heading from one planet to another? I want to throw in a last minute thought here that I forgot to mention in the moment. I love the way that 1899 uses language. Of course, these characters are from all across Europe, so they speak a lot of different languages, and this huge language barrier is one of the main obstacles that prevents them from figuring out what's going on in the ship earlier. Characters have to figure out ways to communicate with each other and make themselves understood to other people who don't speak the same language as them at all. And a lot of the times characters would create bonds through just simple human connection. I'm specifically thinking of Angel and Crester, Ramiro and Anker, Tove and Clemence, Oleg and Ling Yi. These characters would share very deep emotional moments, and even though the other person wouldn't necessarily know what they were saying, they would still be able to be there for them and connect with them through kindness and offering them their time. And I really loved that. Even if they don't understand each other on a verbal level, they understand each other on an innate human level. There are just so many questions and ideas surrounding this show, a lot of which I didn't even touch on. There's also little Easter eggs having to do with technology. The bugs open the doors, and bugs in computer programs can make things act in ways that they shouldn't. Kerberos is a figure in Greek mythology, but it's also a computer program. There was so much to discuss and pick apart about this show, but I have been here for over an hour, and I'm done, I think. Overall, I really did enjoy the first season of 1899, and I hope that it does get renewed and we get to see the full story, because I believe that we are going to get something much bigger, much more complex than we could have ever imagined. I understand that this show is not going to be for everyone. Like I said earlier, it is extremely slow, and when you finally do get to the twists, they're not going to speak to everyone. They're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But I feel like after seeing the absolute incredible success of Dark, we have to be able to see the rest of 1899, because there has to be more. There is definitely more. Okay, that's where I'm going to leave this. Please let me know if you have your own theories, your own interpretations on different things like the simulation and the creator and all of that stuff, because I'm always open to hearing more ideas, because again, there is so much that I did not cover and there is so much that is still left to be explored. I don't know if this is going to be my last video of the year. It probably will be though. So in that case, I wish you all a happy holiday season, and I hope you have a safe new year, and I will see you in 2023. Thanks for watching, and may your coffee kick in before reality does.